"It's a boy," Barnabas announced later, his chest puffed out as he leaned against the counter. "An heir." Keturah caught the look on Keziah's face, a tired sort of pride, and felt a prickle of annoyance. Barnabas hadn't even helped her carry the takeout bags. Later that night, as the guests settled in, Malachi watched the room from the shadows of the hallway. He saw the way Barnabas looked at Keturah, a lingering, appreciative glance that made Malachi's jaw ache. He knew Barnabas's reputation. He knew the man cheated on Keziah every time she was pregnant. Malachi had threatened to dismantle him once, but Keziah had begged him to stay out of it. She preferred the lie. Malachi looked at Keturah, who was currently laughing as she chased Zilphia across the rug. He had told Keturah everything about his first wife's betrayal. He hadn't even told his father the full truth, yet he'd laid it bare for her. She was his opposite in every way, naive, bright, and loud, but she was the only thing keeping him tethered. The next morning, Malachi woke before the sun. He walked into the living room, expecting to find the house silent, but Jedediah was already awake. The boy was on the floor, tossing a ball for Barnaby. "Happy birthday," Malachi said. Jedediah jumped, the ball rolling toward Malachi's bare feet. Barnaby froze, watching the man warily. Malachi picked up the ball and rolled it back. "We'll open presents when the girls wake up," Malachi said, his voice unusually thick. Jedediah held the ball up, his eyes wide and questioning. Malachi sat on the floor, ignoring the ache in his knees. He took the ball and tossed it gently. Barnaby scrambled after it, her tail a blur of motion. They sat there for 20 minutes, a silent exchange of rubber balls and tentative glances, until Barnaby finally collapsed in her basket, exhausted. "How about cake?" Malachi looked up to see Keturah standing in the doorway, Zilphia perched on her hip. She looked soft, her hair a mess, her eyes glowing with a warmth that seemed to fill the entire room. She lit the 3 candles on the rainbow cake. Jedediah leaned in, his face glowing in the candlelight. "Make a wish," Keturah whispered. Jedediah took a deep breath and blew. 1 candle went out. He huffed again, and the other 2 flickered and died. "Good job." Keturah beamed, slicing into the cake. As she pulled the first piece away, the vibrant layers of color were revealed. Jedediah's mouth dropped open. "Wow," he whispered. The room went still. It was the first word the boy had spoken to Malachi in months. Malachi felt a phantom weight lift off his shoulders. He watched Keturah laugh as Zilphia shoved a fistful of buttercream into her mouth. He watched the way Keturah licked the frosting off the baby's fingers, her eyes bright and full of life. He had spent so much time thinking she was too young, too different, too unconventional for a man like him. But as he watched her play with his children, he realized he didn't need a queen to sit on a cold throne beside him. He needed her. "Is Dad a bad man?" The question hit Keturah like a physical blow. She nearly lost her footing on the ladder, her lungs seizing as she gripped a gold ornament. In the 2 weeks since Jedediah's birthday, he had barely uttered a syllable. Now, on the quiet morning before Christmas Eve, he chose this. Keturah waited for the ringing in her ears to stop before she hung the bauble and climbed down. The living room smelled of fresh pine and floor polish. Jedediah sat cross-legged among the piles of tinsel and boxes Keturah had bought specifically to avoid old, painful memories. Beside him, little Zilphia was busy trying to shred a strand of silver tinsel with her tiny hands. Keturah sat on the rug, her knees brushing Jedediah's. The boy didn't look at her. He kept his head down, spinning a red ornament on the hardwood floor. He watched the reflection of the tree lights dancing on the plastic surface with a deep frown. Even the dog, Barnaby, had fled the room the moment the tree arrived, as if sensing the heavy air. "Who told you something like that, Jedediah?" Keturah asked, her voice soft and steady. He was too young to have reached such a dark conclusion on his own. "Mom." The word was a mere whisper. It made Keturah's heart ache. He still wouldn't meet her eyes. What did she say? That Dad's bad. That he hurt Gideon and that made Mom sad. Keturah bit the inside of her cheek. She needed a second to find the right words, so she reached over and gently pried a piece of tinsel out of Zilphia's mouth. The baby let out a sharp, indignant cry, but Keturah was too focused on the boy to react. When the baby realized she wasn't getting any attention, she went back to her boxes. Jedediah finally lifted his head. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, met hers with a weight that shouldn't belong to a child. He was offering her his trust. He was asking for the truth. But the truth was a jagged thing that would only cut him. Keturah knew that Jedediah deserved a childhood, not a front-row seat to a blood feud. Your uncle betrayed your dad, Keturah said, choosing her words like stepping stones across a river. He ran away because he didn't want to be punished for his mistake. That's what hurt your mom so much. She wasn't herself after your uncle left. She didn't really know what she was saying, Jedediah. Your dad does everything to protect you and Zilphia. He loves you both. He would never hurt you. He didn't hurt Mom. No, Keturah whispered. The word felt heavy. It was a lie, and yet, in a way, it was the only truth that could help them heal. It was a shield she was holding up for him. You? Jedediah asked. He doesn't hurt me either. The tension in the boy's shoulders didn't fully disappear, but his gaze softened. Beside them, Zilphia began to crawl toward the massive Christmas tree. She reached for a low-hanging branch, her tiny fingers ready to pull. Keturah lunged forward, scooping the baby up before she could topple the tree. She carried Zilphia over and settled her in Jedediah's lap. Can you keep watch over her for me? Jedediah nodded and pulled his sister close. He hugged her small body to his chest, and Zilphia seemed happy to be the center of his world for a moment. You see? Keturah said gently. You want to protect Zilphia. I want to protect you. And your dad wants to protect all of us. Once the tree was finished, they retreated to Keturah's studio. It had become their afternoon routine. While the kids played with watercolors and paper on the floor, Keturah worked on the final touches of her gift for Malachi. It was a painting of the beach, the exact view from their bedroom window. She wanted it to look so real he could practically smell the salt in the air. Barnaby scratched at the door, but the dog was banned. After she had tracked blue paw prints across half the house the day before, Keturah wasn't taking any chances. Jedediah moved his brush in jagged, blue lines. He looked like he was trying to paint his own version of the sea. Keturah set her palette down and sat beside him on the floor. Her overalls were already stained with a dozen different colors, and her feet were bare against the cool wood. Your dad would love a painting of the ocean for Christmas, Keturah suggested. Why don't you give that one to him? Jedediah dipped his brush back into the blue. Okay, he murmured. Nothing would make him happier than hearing your voice again, you know. Keturah kissed his temple and stood up. She hoped her words were sinking in. The house felt smaller on Christmas Eve. The dining room was filled with the noise of the extended family. Even Priscilla and her husband had come over, and Keziah looked like she was about to give birth right there at the dinner table. Hezekiah, Malachi's father, sat at the head of the table. He watched Keturah and Malachi with eyes like a hawk. He was a man who cared about one thing above all else, the family line. When are you going to bless us with another grandchild? Hezekiah asked. Keturah nearly choked on a piece of roasted asparagus. She reached for her water, her face flushing. Jedediah looked back and forth between the adults, his eyes wide with confusion. I'm blessing you with a grandchild any day now, Keziah cut in, patting her stomach with a pointed look at her father-in-law. Hezekiah dismissed her with a wave of his hand. I'm happy about your son, Keziah. But what about you, Malachi? The room went quiet. Keturah saw the vein in Malachi's throat throb. He put his fork and knife down with slow, deliberate precision. Under the table, Keturah reached out and rested her hand on his leg, a silent plea for him to keep his temper. "I have 2 small children," Malachi said, his voice dropping an octave. "That is enough. You should keep your young wife in mind," Hezekiah pushed. Keturah knew what this was really about. Hezekiah didn't trust that Jedediah and Zilphia were Malachi's blood. He wanted a pure heir. It was the old way, the Mafia way. "I'm happy with what we have," Keturah said, her voice clear. Malachi's hand covered hers under the table. She could feel the gratitude in his grip. "Now, maybe," Hezekiah grumbled. "But what about in a few years?" "Father," Malachi snapped. "That's none of your business." Keziah quickly changed the subject to Keturah's painting, and the tension eased slightly, though the shadow of the conversation hung over the rest of the meal. By the time the guests finally left, the house felt cavernous again. Keturah stood in the doorway of Jedediah's room as Malachi finished putting Zilphia to bed. "Jedediah wants you to tuck him in tonight," Keturah whispered as Malachi walked toward her. Malachi stopped. He looked at her as if he hadn't heard her correctly. He peered past her into the room, where Jedediah was sitting on his bed, stroking the dog. The boy looked up expectantly. "You want me to read a story?" Malachi asked, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Jedediah nodded. Malachi looked at Keturah, a rare, hopeful smile breaking across his face. He leaned down and kissed her, a quick, tender press of lips, before heading into the room. Keturah watched from the hallway. She saw Jedediah's brow furrow as Malachi sat on the edge of the mattress. "You kissed Keturah," Jedediah said. Malachi froze for a second, then set the book aside. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I really like Keturah." Jedediah looked down at the dog. "You liked Mom too." Keturah held her breath. She saw Malachi reach out and stroke the boy's hair. "I did," Malachi lied. "I miss Mom." "I know." Malachi pulled the boy into his chest. Jedediah didn't pull away. He leaned into his father, finally letting the wall between them crumble. "I miss her too." "I like Keturah too," Jedediah whispered. "Will she stay?" "Yes," Malachi promised. "She's staying." By the time Keturah walked into their bedroom, Malachi was already there, waiting. The air between them felt different tonight, thicker, more honest. "How did it go?" she asked. "Good," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I thought we could exchange our gifts tonight," Keturah said. "Tomorrow is for the kids." "And Barnaby." Malachi laughed. "You got the dog a present?" "She's family. And I got things for the staff, too." "Don't be a Grinch." Malachi shook his head. "Let me get your gift." "It's in the office." "Wait, mine is in the studio." "You have to come with me." She led him down the hall, making him promise to keep his eyes closed. When they reached the center of her paint-splattered room, she let go of his hand. "Open them." Malachi looked at the canvas. He stood in silence for a long time, tracing the painted waves with his eyes. "Did you do this?" "I did." "Do you like it?" "It's stunning, Keturah." He turned to her and kissed her, then pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket. Keturah opened it and gasped. Inside were 2 small sunflowers made of solid gold. They were delicate and elegant, far from the cheap, bright plastic ones she usually wore. "They're beautiful," she breathed. "I thought you hated these." "I don't hate what you love," he said. He picked her up, carrying her toward the bed. That night, there was no rushing. There was no performance. It was slow and quiet. Later, as Keturah curled into his side, she whispered, "This felt different. Like it meant something." Malachi didn't pull away. "It did. It's never been like this for me before. Not with anyone." Keturah looked up at him. Really? Not even after Hadassah? No. There was no one. He paused, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Only once, right after I found out about her and Gideon. I was drunk. It was a mistake. I never told her. I only want you, Keturah said, her voice fierce. I don't like to share. Malachi let out a short, dry laugh. He rolled over, pinning her to the mattress with a look that made her breath hitch. You don't have to worry, he murmured. You're more than enough for me. Prove it. You're going to be around other boys tomorrow, Jedediah, Malachi said, his voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the billiard room. It's time you learned how to brawl. Keturah, who had been leaning over the pool table to line up a shot, froze mid-motion. She straightened slowly, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and rising heat. What? Why? He's only just started talking again, Malachi. Malachi leaned against his cue, watching his wife. He had made the appointment for the preschool orientation days ago. It was an exclusive place, filled only with the sons of his business associates and the elite of their circle. These were the boys who would one day be Jedediah's soldiers, or his rivals. He needed to see how the boy held up outside the protective bubble Keturah had built around him. I want him around other kids, Malachi explained, his tone clipped. He needs to learn to assert himself. If he stays only with you, he'll become soft. He needs to meet unruly boys. Don't you dare, Keturah snapped, her finger jabbing toward his chest. You don't even know what I was going to say. You just decide things and expect me to follow. Malachi felt his jaw tighten. The conversation with his father earlier that day was still a sour taste in his mouth. Hezekiah was still obsessed with the idea of a true heir, still whispering about the high statistical probability that Jedediah and Zilphia weren't Malachi's blood. The old man lived by the cold logic of lineage, ignoring the reality of the two children currently sleeping upstairs. My decision is made, Malachi said. Jedediah needs the change. We are a family. Keturah's voice rose, a rare sharp edge cutting through the quiet room. I am your wife. I deserve to be involved in a decision like that. They are my kids, Keturah, he countered, the words coming out colder than he intended. The look of pure, unadulterated hurt that flashed across her face hit him harder than a physical blow. She didn't back down. Instead, she stepped into his space, her eyes blazing. No, she said fiercely. They are our kids, Malachi. I love all three of you. You don't get to call them yours only when it's convenient. I would bleed for them just the same. So don't you ever talk to me like they don't mean everything to me. Malachi stared at her. The anger that usually fueled him in an argument evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. He had spent years with Hadassah, where every fight was a performance of spite. But this? This was raw. This was the first time she had ever raised her voice to him, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. He realized then that he loved every part of her, the bangs he used to hate, the way she rolled her eyes when he was being difficult, and the way she fought for children that weren't hers by blood. I love you too, he whispered. Keturah blinked, her mouth falling open. The fury died out, replaced by a fragile disbelief. What? You do? You really have to ask. Malachi reached out, cupping her cheeks with his palms. He felt the warmth of her skin and the frantic beat of her pulse. I love you. Say it again, she demanded, a small, shaky smile forming. I love you, he repeated, chuckling low in his throat before pulling her into a deep, lingering kiss. Later that week, the heavy air of the cigar lounge felt different. Malachi sat with Obadiah, his consigliere, discussing the volatile state of New York. Thaddeus Beiler was on a warpath, cleaning house with a brutality that had the entire underworld on edge. Thaddeus is killing anyone who looks at him wrong, Obadiah said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. If he finds out the truth about what happened with Hadassah and Gideon, that's a death sentence for all of us. My father handled the witnesses, Malachi said, though the thought of Hezekiah's handling things usually meant a trail of bodies. Only you, my father, and I know the truth. And Keturah? Obadiah asked, leaning forward. She's a woman, Malachi. She'll talk to her brother or her father eventually. I trust her, Malachi said firmly. She won't say a word. A soft knock interrupted them. Keturah poked her head in, her expression guarded. Abram is here. He says he needs to speak with you. Malachi nodded slowly. Send him in. Abram stepped into the room, keeping his distance. The tension between the two men was a physical weight. Since the incident in December where Malachi's jealousy had nearly turned fatal, the bridge between them was burnt to a crisp. I talked to Thaddeus, Abram said without preamble. Obadiah stiffened beside Malachi, but Malachi remained still. I'm moving to New York tomorrow. I'll be working under him until I take over Baltimore. Malachi's eyes narrowed. You didn't think to consult your boss first? I'm the son of an underboss, Malachi, Abram replied with a tight, knowing smile. Only Thaddeus gives me orders. We both know we don't work well together. This is for the best. He gave a sharp nod and turned to leave. He didn't offer a hand, and Malachi didn't ask for one. When the house finally grew quiet after midnight, Malachi sat alone by the fireplace in the lounge. He had shed his jacket and tie, the top buttons of his shirt undone. The weight of the world felt heavy on his shoulders. The threat of Thaddeus, the shadow of his father's secrets, and the constant pressure of the outfit felt like a tightening noose. The door clicked open. Keturah stepped in, her eyes softening as she saw him brooding in the dim light. She didn't ask if he was okay, she knew him better than that now. She walked over and locked the door behind her. You're worrying too much, she murmured, walking toward him. It's business, Keturah, he said, his voice raspy. I can make you feel better, she promised. She knelt between his legs, her movements purposeful and gentle. Malachi let his head fall back against the chair, closing his eyes as she began to take care of him. She used an ice cube from his drink, the shocking contrast of cold and heat making his breath hitch. For the first time in a long time, he let someone else take the lead. He let her show him, in the way she knew best, that he wasn't alone in this. When the storm of passion finally settled, Keturah sat on his lap, her head resting against his shoulder. The fire was dying down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. I think Zilphia is starting to speak, she whispered into the crook of his neck. What did she say? Dada. It sounds like Dad, Keturah said. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I've been thinking, since she doesn't remember her mother, maybe she should call me Mom. I don't want her to grow up without one. Malachi felt a lump form in his throat. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The statistics didn't matter. The blood didn't matter. This woman had walked into a house of ghosts and turned it into a home. You're right, Malachi said, his voice thick with emotion. You are her mother now. He kissed her forehead, holding her close. Outside these walls, the world was dangerous and filled with people waiting for him to slip. But here, in the quiet dark, he had everything he needed. I'll take Jedediah to the school tomorrow, Keturah said softly. But we'll decide on the schedule together. Malachi gave her a tired smile. Deal. Are you ready to see the ocean, Zilphia? Keturah adjusted the tiny straw hat on the toddler's head. Zilphia giggled, her yellow ruffled swimsuit matching Keturah's bikini perfectly. In the bright June sun, the beach house looked like something out of a travel magazine. Jedediah dashed past them, his Superman trunks fluttering as he raced toward the shoreline with Barnaby the dog nipping at his heels. Don't go too deep, Jedediah. Keturah called out. Malachi appeared behind her, looking far too handsome in simple board shorts. He didn't say a word, but the way his hand lingered on the small of her back spoke volumes. He scooped Jedediah up, hoisting the boy onto his shoulders before wading into the Atlantic. Keturah stayed back with Zilphia, letting the freezing foam tickle their toes. Zilphia squealed, clutching Keturah's hand tight. The little girl looked up, her eyes wide with pure, unfiltered trust. Mom, Zilphia said, reaching up. The word hit Keturah like a physical weight, heavy, warm, and terrifyingly beautiful. She picked the girl up, pressing her nose against Zilphia's sun-warmed cheek. "I've got you," Keturah whispered. From the water, Malachi watched them. He looked at peace, a rarity for a man whose life was usually defined by shadows and high-stakes contracts. Even Barnaby seemed to sense the shift, barking happily at the waves. The peace didn't last long. Jedediah, eager to show off for his father, scrambled out of the water and began sprinting across the wet sand. "Not so fast!" Keturah shouted. Jedediah's foot caught on a jagged stone hidden beneath the surface. He tumbled hard, his cry cutting through the sound of the crashing waves. Keturah dropped to the sand beside him in seconds. Barnaby was already there, licking the boy's face in a frantic attempt to help. "It's okay, big man," Keturah said, kneeling in the wet sand. "Let me see." Jedediah's knee was sliced open, blood mixing with salt water and sand. Malachi's shadow loomed over them. Without a word, he handed Zilphia to Keturah and gathered his son into his arms. "We'll fix it up inside," Malachi said, his voice a low, steady rumble that immediately quieted Jedediah's sobs. Inside the beach house, the air was cool and smelled of cedar. Keturah watched from the doorway as Malachi cleaned the wound with practiced, gentle hands. He didn't lecture the boy about running. He just worked, his focus entirely on the child. "All done," Malachi said, smoothing a bright blue bandage over the cut. "You handled that like a champ." Jedediah wiped his eyes, trying to mirror his father's stoic expression. Keturah stepped forward, leaning against the sofa. "Do you want a popsicle?" she asked softly. Jedediah bit his lip. He didn't look at the kitchen. Instead, he stared at his feet, his fingers twisting together. Keturah realized something was wrong. She sank down on her haunches so she was eye level with him. "Jedediah? What's on your mind?" The boy didn't answer with words. He lunged forward, wrapping his small arms around her neck in a desperate hug. Keturah froze for a heartbeat before pulling him close, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mom," he whispered into her shoulder. The room went silent. Keturah felt Malachi stiffen beside her. She knew what he was thinking. Was Jedediah confused? Was he remembering Hadassah, the mother who had left them in the darkest way possible? Keturah pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Jedediah? Can I call you Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. "For real?" Tears blurred Keturah's vision. She didn't look at Malachi. She didn't think about the past or the secrets buried in the family tree. She just pulled the boy back into her arms, squeezing him tight. "Yes," she choked out. "Nothing would make me happier. I love you so much." Malachi moved then. He knelt in the sand-dusted carpet, wrapping his massive arms around both of them. Keturah leaned her head against his chest, listening to the thundering rhythm of his heart. The rest of the day was a blur of, "Mom, look at this," and, "Mom, watch me." Jedediah said the word every chance he got, his initial shyness melting into a giddy, constant refrain. That evening, once the kids were finally tucked away, Keturah and Malachi sat on the porch swing. The sun was a bruised purple on the horizon. "I didn't expect that today," Keturah said, breaking the silence. Malachi's arm tightened around her. "Neither did I. He's old enough to remember her, but maybe the memory is fading. Maybe it's a blessing." Keturah leaned her head on his shoulder. "They'll have questions eventually, Malachi. About Hadassah. It's natural. Until they ask, I won't speak her name, Malachi said, his jaw tightening. Everything I'd tell them would be a lie anyway. Not everything, Keturah reminded him gently. Malachi sighed, the sound lost in the wind. When we married, I thought I was just doing damage control. I wanted a partner who could handle the house. A nanny with perks. Keturah nudged him with her elbow. Wow. Way to kill the mood, Cass. He chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. I'm serious. I didn't expect to actually like you. I didn't expect to want your company when the lights were on. I catch myself looking for you in every room. Is that a confession? She teased. He turned to her, his hand cupping her jaw. His thumb traced her lower lip. I trust you, Keturah. It's hard for me, seeing what I see every day, to expect anything but the worst from people. But you shut up the voices in my head. I'm not going anywhere, Keturah promised. And I'm never going to betray this family. Malachi leaned in, his lips brushing hers. You've breathed life back into this house. Into me. Keturah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She glanced toward the dunes, then back at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Life, huh? Is that why you're looking at me like that? Don't start, he warned, though his smile was turning wolfish. Keturah stood up, taking a step back toward the sandy path. I was thinking the beach looked pretty private tonight. If you can catch me, that is. She didn't wait for an answer. She whipped her shirt over her head and tossed it onto the porch. Keturah. Malachi barked, but he was already kicking off his shoes. You're getting slow, old man, she yelled, sprinting toward the water. The sand was cool under her feet. She heard the heavy thud of his footsteps behind her. He was fast, terrifyingly fast for a man of his size. She reached the water's edge, the freezing spray hitting her skin, just as his arms locked around her waist. Gotcha, he growled, lifting her off her feet. Malachi, put me down. It's freezing. You wanted the beach, he said, stepping directly into the surf. Now you get the ocean. He dropped her into a shallow wave. The cold was a physical shock, making her scream and laugh at the same time. When she surfaced, gasping for air, he was standing over her, looking completely unfazed by the temperature. You're a monster, she panted, wiping salt from her eyes. And you're shivering, he said, reaching down to pull her against his chest. The heat radiating from his body was an instant relief. I have a few ideas on how to fix that. He kissed her then, a deep, possessive claim that made the cold Atlantic disappear. Later, they retreated to the porch, sandy and exhausted. They were back on the swing when the glass door slid open. Zilphia stood there, rubbing her eyes, followed closely by Jedediah. Without a word, the kids piled onto the swing. Zilphia curled into Malachi's lap, and Jedediah tucked himself under Keturah's arm. Keturah looked at the man beside her, the children between them, and the dark ocean beyond. She had entered this marriage as a contract, a duty to her father. Now, she was the guardian of a family built on secrets and blood. She thought of the truth she was keeping, the secret Malachi's father had told her. Lies usually caught up with people. But looking at Jedediah's peaceful face, Keturah made a silent vow. I'll protect this, she whispered to the night. Malachi looked at her, his eyes dark and questioning. Did you say something? Do you still not want any more children? The question blurted out of Keturah's mouth before she could find her composure. Across the small, candlelit table of their favorite French bistro, Malachi lowered his wine glass slowly. He looked at her, his brow furrowing in a way that usually meant he was calculating a move. Are you? He let the sentence hang, his eyes dropping to her stomach. Keturah rolled her eyes and lifted her nearly empty glass of Viognier. Really, Malachi? Do you think I'd be finishing a second glass of white wine if I were pregnant? Malachi let out a low chuckle, the tension in his shoulders vanishing. I didn't think about it. My mistake. Men, Keturah muttered, though she couldn't keep the smile off her face. She reached across the white tablecloth, her voice turning soft. So. What do you say? She felt a flutter of nerves. 9 years of marriage and they shared almost everything, except for the brutal details of his work and the dark secret about Zilphia and Jedediah that she kept locked in the basement of her heart. Malachi placed his hand over hers. His skin was warm, his grip grounding. Do you want another child? He didn't say a child. He didn't say your own child. He said another. It was the confirmation Keturah needed. Zilphia and Jedediah were hers in every way that mattered, but the house felt too quiet lately. I don't feel like the family is complete, Keturah admitted. I want a baby to cuddle again. They also cry, vomit, and ruin the furniture, Malachi reminded her, a playful glint in his eyes. And once they stop doing that, they start the tantrums. You really want to go back to the beginning? Keturah grinned. Yes. Every bit of it. Malachi shook his head as if she were being completely unreasonable, but his expression stayed tender. If you want another baby, you'll get one. I don't want you to do this just as a favor to me, she countered. Malachi leaned over the table, his voice dropping to a gravelly silk. Trust me, Keturah. Giving you a baby isn't a chore. Keturah felt a flush creep up her neck. She kicked off her high heel and ran her foot up his trouser leg, her smile turning suggestive. In his tailored suit, Malachi looked entirely too handsome for a public place. We could start tonight, she whispered. One corner of his mouth quirked up. Are you sure you want to miss the duck and the crepes? Hearing him speak French was usually a distraction, but Keturah pressed her heel firmly against him, rewarded by a sharp hiss of breath from his throat. Okay, she conceded, pulling her foot back as the waiter approached. Food first. Everything else later. By Christmas, the beach house was filled with the scent of pine and roasting meat. Malachi looked more relaxed than he had in months. Being the underboss meant someone always wanted a piece of his time, but here, the only people he had to answer to were his children. Zilphia and Jedediah were busy arguing over the placement of a glass ornament while Keturah finished the meal prep. Barnaby, their dog, sat at her feet like a furry shadow, waiting for a scrap of bacon to fall. Keturah watched them, a hand instinctively resting on her stomach. She hadn't told him yet. She had a gift box hidden upstairs containing a tiny onesie and a few joke items, earplugs and rug cleaner, a nod to the time Zilphia had caused a permanent stain on the living room carpet. At dinner, she pointedly ignored the wine. She caught Malachi's sister, Keziah, giving her a knowing look. Even Malachi seemed to be watching her more closely. But it was Hezekiah, Malachi's father, who worried her. His health had declined sharply over the winter. He sat in a wheelchair now, his frame thin and brittle. His eyes, however, remained sharp and fixed on her middle. After dinner, while the kids were distracted by their cousins, Hezekiah pulled Malachi aside. Keturah watched from the doorway, her heart sinking. You should do a paternity test now, Hezekiah whispered, his voice harsh despite his weakness. Your unborn child deserves it. What are you talking about? Malachi's voice was a low growl. If it's a boy, Hezekiah pressed, he would be your true heir. Not Jedediah. This discussion is over, Malachi snapped. Do not bring this up again. Hezekiah sighed, leaning back in his chair. I am an old man. I don't know how much time I have left. Then don't spend that time destroying our relationship, Malachi said. He signaled for his mother to will Hezekiah out. When the house finally cleared, Malachi found Keturah in their bedroom. He looked at the gift box she held, then back at her. A slow, stunned realization broke across his face. I'm pregnant, she whispered. Malachi stepped forward and wrapped her in a gentle embrace. He kissed her deeply, his hands trembling just a fraction. That was fast, he murmured, a note of pride in his voice. Keturah leaned back, smirking. Well, we practiced a lot. Your swimmers were ready for the Olympics. Malachi laughed, the tension of the evening finally breaking. I never know what to do with you, Keturah. Kiss me again, she said. They waited 6 weeks before telling the kids. They sat Zilphia and Jedediah down at the dining table on a Tuesday night. When the news broke, the house erupted. Is it a girl? Zilphia demanded, rushing over to hug Keturah's waist. Please be a sister. Boys are annoying. Hey. You're the annoying one, Jedediah shot back, a noodle falling out of his mouth as he spoke. You're gross, Zilphia wrinkled her nose. Jedediah let out a loud burp in response. That's gross. Enough, Malachi said, though he was fighting a smile. Sit down and finish your dinner. Keturah laughed, her eyes bright with relief. Even with the bickering, the house felt full of life. It was exactly what she wanted. The happiness lasted until Keturah's 8th month. Hezekiah had suffered another heart attack, and the prognosis was grim. When he asked to see Keturah alone in his hospital room, she went with a heavy sense of dread. The room smelled of antiseptic and fading life. Hezekiah looked like a ghost in the bed, his skin translucent. How are you feeling? Keturah asked softly, taking the chair beside him. I don't have long, he rasped. He reached out, his hand shaking as he touched hers. I want my blood to live on. To rule. You carry the true heir, Keturah. Jedediah shouldn't be the underboss. It isn't right. Keturah pulled her hand away, her blood running cold. We shouldn't have told you it was a boy. You're obsessed. Tell Malachi the truth, Hezekiah pleaded. He needs to know about those kids before I go. No, Keturah said firmly. I won't tell him, and you won't either. Hezekiah smiled sadly. He loves you. He would forgive you for keeping the secret. But he needs to know so he can make his son the heir. Every man wants a legacy, Keturah. Your son is his legacy. Jedediah is just a product of betrayal. How can you say that? Keturah's voice rose, a fierce protectiveness surging through her. Jedediah is his son in every way that counts. If you let the truth slip, Hezekiah whispered, his eyes burning with a final, desperate light, Malachi will do what is right. He'll disinherit the boy. If the Famiglia finds out about the incest in Jedediah's blood, they will never accept him. Jedediah and Zilphia are innocent, Keturah snapped. I won't do it. I will pretend we never had this conversation. Promise me you won't tell anyone. Hezekiah looked away, his silence stretching out until it felt like a physical weight in the room. Who did you tell? Keturah asked, her voice trembling. Hezekiah, who did you tell? The old man sighed, a sound of pure regret. Your father. Keturah stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. You told my father? How could he have told my father? Keturah whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He might as well have announced it on the news. She spun around and hurried out of the hospital room, nearly slamming into Keziah. The other woman caught her by the shoulders, her grip steady and firm. Hey, what's wrong? Keziah asked, her brow furrowed. Keturah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I forgot about an appointment. I'm sorry. I need to leave. Keziah hesitated, worry etching lines into her face, but she let go. Enoch, waiting in the corridor, immediately fell into step beside Keturah. She motioned for him to give her space and pulled out her phone to call her father. He picked up on the second ring, his voice booming with a cheer that made Keturah's stomach churn. Keturah, how's my grandson? Don't tell anyone, Dad, she snapped, her voice low and dangerous. Don't. Swear it. The silence on the other end was heavy. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Jedediah and Zilphia. Don't tell anyone what Hezekiah told you. Keturah, her father began, using that condescending tone he had used since she was a child. Dad, I mean it. I don't want the news to get out. You are the only one who could spread it. Keturah's pace quickened, but the weight of her pregnancy slowed her down. She headed for the elevator, knowing the stairs were no longer an option. You can't expect me to sit on this, her father argued. This information leads to my grandson becoming underboss. You should want that too. Do you want your son to serve under the result of a scandal? Keturah gritted her teeth, ignoring the insult to the children she loved. Enoch watched her with growing concern as they descended to the underground garage. I'm coming to Baltimore. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 2 hours. Swear it. Her father sighed. I swear it. I'll tell your mother to have the cooks prepare dinner. Keturah hung up and looked at Enoch. We need to drive to Baltimore. Now. Enoch frowned but didn't argue. He led her to the car and opened the door. You need to tell Malachi first. Keturah sank into the passenger seat. I'll call him. She dialed, but the line was busy. Thaddeus was in town, and the meetings were likely intense. We can't wait. It's urgent. Traffic was a nightmare. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, the phone buzzed. It was Malachi. Are you all right? He asked, his voice laced with a warmth that usually calmed her. Today, it only made her more anxious. I'm fine. The baby is fine. Don't worry. I'm just on my way to see my parents. What's the matter? Keturah hated the lie, but the truth was too heavy for a phone call. My mother had a rough day. I want to check on her. They've been asking for a visit. Isn't it too much travel for you right now? Keturah huffed. I'm pregnant, not sick. Be careful, Malachi said. Enoch is with you? Of course. And Abram will be there. Good. Unlike your father, your brother is capable. Keturah didn't defend her father this time. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Okay, Malachi murmured. In the background, she heard the low murmur of men's voices. I love you, he said, so soft only she could hear. I love you too. The drive continued in a blur. Keturah fell asleep and only woke when the car stopped in front of her childhood home. Her parents were waiting on the porch, looking as though they had won the lottery. It broke her heart. She greeted them briefly and turned to her brother, Abram. You're growing bigger every day, he noted. Don't say that to a woman, she joked weakly. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Once dinner was served and the staff dismissed, Keturah leaned forward. I assume Dad told you. Abram nodded grimly. Her mother, however, looked radiant. You should be happy, Keturah. This is your chance. My chance for what? Keturah's voice rose. I don't want this news to get out. You should want what's best for your child, her father lectured. Keturah snapped. Is that so? Was it for my best when you married me off to a man twice my age? Was that for my best or yours, Dad? The table went silent. Her father's face turned to stone. How can you speak to him like that? Her mother hissed. Show some respect. Keturah forced herself to take a bite of food, trying to settle her nerves. I respect you, but your ambition will ruin everything. I don't care about titles. I want my children safe. You were always a dreamer, her father said. But I am a man of reality. I won't have a scandal-born heir as underboss. Our blood will rule Philadelphia. Dad, Abram warned. No. I don't care if I have to tell every member of the organization myself. Our lineage comes first. Keturah dropped her fork. The metal clattered against the porcelain like a gunshot. She stood up. If that's the case, today is the last time you'll see me. Stay, Abram urged, touching her arm. It's too late to drive. I won't stay here another second. Her father stood, tall and unyielding. I'm doing this for the family. You'll thank me when the boy is born. Keturah looked at them with pity. You're wrong. I'm grateful I didn't inherit your greed. I won't let my children be pawns. Not Jedediah, not Zilphia, and not Solomon. She touched her stomach. I will fight anyone to protect them. Even you. She turned and walked out, her heart hammering. Enoch was waiting in the lobby, his hand hovering near his jacket. Abram followed her to the car. Text me when you're home, Abram said quietly. I wish you were in charge already, Keturah told him. I'll try to talk them down, but you know them. This is their big play. Keturah closed the door. She knew there was only one person who could truly stop her father. Someone he feared more than death. Is Thaddeus still in the city? She asked Enoch. I think so. Why? Find him. Take me to him. Enoch's eyes widened. You can't just visit the Capo, Keturah. He's my cousin. He'll see me. They drove to the Ritz-Carlton. Enoch was vibrating with tension. He's going to think this is a setup. Thaddeus doesn't trust anyone. He won't shoot a pregnant cousin. Stay here. Keturah navigated the lobby and the security. When she reached the presidential suite, she knocked. A moment later, the door cracked open. Thaddeus stood there, a silencer-equipped pistol in his hand, his eyes like chips of ice. Good evening, Thaddeus, Keturah said, her voice remarkably steady. Can we talk? Thaddeus glanced at Enoch in the hallway, then stepped back. Come in. Inside, the luxury of the suite felt cold. Thaddeus sat across from her, his gun holstered but his posture alert. Does Malachi know you're here? No. And I'd like it to stay that way. Thaddeus leaned forward. What is so important that you're hiding it from your husband? His eyes flicked to her stomach. It's not about this baby. It's about Jedediah and Zilphia. They aren't Malachi's. The silence that followed was deafening. Thaddeus didn't move a muscle. How do you know? Hezekiah ran a test. He told my father. Now my parents want to use the information to put my unborn son in power. Thaddeus's expression shifted, something dark and predatory taking hold. You're telling me this because you want my help. I want you to silence my father. He's terrified of you. If you tell him to stay quiet, he will. Thaddeus let out a cold, sharp laugh. You want me to threaten your parents? I want you to protect my children. Thaddeus stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow. Your husband told me he dealt with a traitor. Now I find out it was a personal matter. Malachi lied to me. I need to speak with him. Keturah felt the floor drop away. No, Thaddeus, please. He was hurting. He wasn't thinking straight. I'll decide that when I talk to him. Thaddeus pulled out his phone. You won't kill him, Keturah stated, though it felt more like a plea. I'm your family. A man would be dead for that tone, Thaddeus remarked. I'm not a man. Thaddeus ignored her and made the call. Malachi, come to my suite. Now. He hung up and looked at Keturah with a chilling smile. Your husband is already downstairs. Your bodyguard called him the moment you stepped inside. The door opened minutes later. Malachi walked in, his eyes immediately finding Keturah. He moved to her side, his hand resting on her hip. What's going on? I'm sorry, Keturah whispered. I tried to fix it and I made it worse. Malachi looked at Thaddeus. The air in the room turned electric. Two predators, measuring each other. Let Enoch take you home, Malachi said softly. No. Thaddeus knows about the children. He knows everything. Malachi nodded. I know. Your brother called me. He told me you were fighting like a lioness for us. Keturah's breath hitched. You know. I know. Malachi kissed her temple. Now, go home. Will everything be fine, Thaddeus? Keturah demanded, stepping around Malachi to face the capo. Thaddeus's gray eyes were unreadable. You should leave. I'm not leaving until you swear he's coming home. Malachi tried to lead her to the door. In a move of pure desperation, Keturah let her weight drop, sinking to the floor. I'm staying right here. You'll have to drag me out. Malachi sighed, a flash of admiration in his eyes. He scooped her up effortlessly. At the door, he cupped her face. Go home, honey. I swear I'll return. Enoch took her arm and led her away. As the door clicked shut, Keturah looked back one last time, seeing the two most dangerous men in the city face to face. Drive, she told Enoch, her heart breaking. Just drive. You lied about Gideon, Thaddeus said. His voice was like a low winter wind, cold and full of warning. He didn't raise his gun, but he didn't put it away either. Malachi kept his hands visible. He respected Thaddeus more than any other man in the outfit, but he knew the rules. In this world, respect didn't buy you a pass on a bullet. I didn't lie, Thaddeus. I just didn't give you the whole story. Thaddeus's lip curled. It was a dangerous, jagged expression. In our business, leaving things out is the same as a lie. You know that. The only person I care to answer to is you, Malachi countered. He didn't blink. He couldn't afford to. Thaddeus stepped closer. He was a natural predator, just as comfortable killing with his bare hands as he was with a silencer. If that were true, you would have been straight with me from the start. Malachi took a steady breath. Gideon was my soldier. When I took him out, I did it under the laws of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is mine, Thaddeus snapped, his eyes flashing. Every street, every dock, every life in the East belongs to me. You rule it in my name. Don't you ever forget where your power comes from. I don't, Malachi said. But you trust me to run that city because I do it well. You don't want a report every time a gutter rat gets stepped on. You trust me to handle the trash. I expect to know when there's a traitor in the ranks, Thaddeus said. Gideon was a rat, Malachi said, the words tasting like poison. Was he? Thaddeus asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Or was he just the man sleeping with your wife? The air in the room turned brittle. Any other man would have been dead before the sentence ended. Malachi felt the familiar, burning rage clawing at his throat, but he shoved it down. He couldn't lose his head, not here. He was both, Malachi admitted. His voice was thick with suppressed fury. The bikers I took apart in Philly had a contact. The description was a perfect match for Gideon. But that wasn't why I ended him. Thaddeus tilted his head, waiting. I came home from the hit on the clubhouse, Malachi said. He forced himself to look Thaddeus in the eye. I found them together. My wife, pregnant with his child, in my own house while my son was downstairs. Gideon didn't even try to hide it. He bragged about it. He told me my children weren't even mine. I didn't use a gun. I used my fists. I broke every bone in his body until he didn't look like a man anymore. And if he stood here right now, I'd do it again. Thaddeus studied him for a long moment. He understood the code of the blood. He understood a man protecting his honor. Slowly, he tucked his weapon back into its holster. Did you kill Hadassah too? No, Malachi said firmly. She took her own life. She couldn't live without him. That's the truth I gave the world, and that's the truth that stays. The pain of Hadassah's betrayal didn't sting the way it used to. She was a ghost. Keturah was his reality now. Keturah was the woman who had taught him that a heart could be rebuilt. I expect total honesty from my underbosses, Thaddeus said. I wanted to protect the kids, Malachi said. It was a rare moment of vulnerability. If the truth about their blood got out, they'd be outcasts. People already talk. I couldn't let it destroy their future. I get it, Thaddeus said. He reached for his phone. I'll make sure Ephraim keeps his mouth shut. Unless you want to handle your father-in-law yourself. Malachi shook his head. Jedediah and Zilphia are my children. In every way that matters. They can never know. They won't, Thaddeus promised. He dialed a number and waited. Ephraim. I hear you've been gossiping. You're going to keep that mouth shut. You're coming to New York tomorrow at 4. Don't be late. We're going to have a very long talk about the cost of a secret. He hung up without waiting for an answer. Go back to your wife, Malachi, Thaddeus said. But as Malachi turned to the door, Thaddeus's voice cracked like a whip. This was your last pass. 3 kids or not, if you omit the truth again, there won't be a conversation. Understood, Malachi said. He walked out into the hall, where his bodyguard, Obadiah, looked like he'd been holding his breath for 20 minutes. They didn't speak until they were in the elevator. I didn't think you were coming out of there, Obadiah muttered. Thaddeus knows I'm worth more to him alive, Malachi said, though his heart was still hammering against his ribs. When he finally walked through his front door, Keturah didn't give him a chance to speak. She threw her arms around him, her pregnant belly pressing against him. Her eyes were red from crying. Behind her, Jedediah stood in the foyer. The boy was 12 now, growing tall, looking more like a man every day. Shouldn't you be asleep? Malachi asked, his voice softening. Mom was crying, Jedediah said. His voice was deep, shifting. She wouldn't tell me why. Is everything okay, Dad? Hearing that word, Dad, sent a jolt of pride through Malachi's chest. It didn't matter whose blood ran through the boy's veins. This was his son. It was just a misunderstanding with Thaddeus, Malachi said. He stepped forward and pulled Jedediah into a brief, firm hug. I fixed it. Go on to bed. You have school. Jedediah nodded, the tension leaving his shoulders, and headed upstairs. Malachi turned back to Keturah and pulled her close. Nothing changes, she whispered. Nothing, Malachi agreed. Jedediah is my boy. He's going to be a great underboss one day. Later that night, the house was silent. Malachi sat in the dark of his cigar lounge, a drink in his hand. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace. Barnaby, the family dog, trotted in and hopped onto his lap. He stroked her fur, staring into the embers. Secrets were like shadows, they always stretched longer as the sun went down. He thought about his own father, Hezekiah. The man had performed a secret paternity test years ago. He had tried to use the truth to manipulate the future. It was a betrayal Malachi wasn't sure he could ever forgive. His phone buzzed. It was his sister, Keziah. You have to come to the hospital, she said, her voice shaking. Dad is dying. He won't make it through the night. The anger in Malachi's gut flickered, but seeing his father in that hospital bed, small, frail, and pale, made the rage evaporate. Hezekiah looked terrified. Malachi, the old man whispered, his hand trembling as he reached out. I wanted what was best for the family. I'm sorry. Can you forgive me? Malachi looked at the man who had raised him. Forgiveness wasn't something he gave easily, but looking at his father's fading light, he knew what he had to do. I do, he said. It wasn't a total truth, but it was the mercy his father needed. 2 hours later, Hezekiah was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of funerals and business, but the tension finally broke on a quiet evening at home. How's our boy? Malachi asked as he walked into the kitchen. Keturah was days away from her due date. He's hungry, Keturah said with a tired smile. And so am I. I need something sweet. Malachi leaned in and kissed her neck. Just like me. Keturah laughed, a bright, warm sound that filled the room. But the laugh cut short. Her face contorted, her hand gripping the counter. The baby? Malachi asked, his calm facade finally cracking. Yeah, she breathed. It's time. The drive to the hospital was a blur of adrenaline. Malachi had never been in the room for a birth before. With Hadassah, it had been a cold, distant affair. But with Keturah, he held her hand through every contraction. He watched her sweat, heard her cry out, and marveled at the sheer strength of the woman. When the first cry of the baby filled the room, Malachi felt a weight lift off his soul. The nurse placed the bundle in Keturah's arms. Solomon, she whispered. The boy was small, red, and perfect. Malachi wrapped an arm around them both, a sense of peace settling over him that he hadn't felt in years. He had 2 children by blood that wasn't his, and now a son of his own. In his heart, there was no difference. The next day, the whole family gathered in the hospital room. Jedediah and Zilphia peered into the crib like they were looking at a strange new species. He's all wrinkly, Zilphia noted, wrinkling her nose. You were 2, Malachi said, leaning against the window. Keturah's parents and her brother, Abram, arrived later. The air was thick with the history of their recent fights, but the sight of the new baby seemed to act as a bridge. We won't speak of the past again, Keturah's father promised, looking at his daughter with genuine regret. If it's your wish, the secret stays buried. It is, Keturah said. As the sun set over the city, Malachi watched his family. His wife, his children, and even the dog. The path had been violent and the secrets were heavy, but they were his. Ready to go home? Malachi asked. Keturah looked at him, her eyes full of the future. I've been home this whole time. Are you going to stand there all morning, or are you going to join us? Keturah called out. Benjamin leaned against the wooden railing of the porch. The salt air felt thick and cool against his skin. In the old days, he came to this beach house for silence. He used to wake up before the sun just to hear the water without another soul nearby. He used to bring stacks of paperwork and a heavy heart. Back then, he thought peace was something you found in the absence of people. He was wrong. Benjamin looked down at the sand. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud. It was messy. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be anywhere else. He checked his watch. It was past 9. He had actually slept in. That was a habit Keturah had forced on him, and he found he didn't mind the change. I'm coming, Benjamin said, his voice low and gravelly with sleep. He walked down the stairs, the dry sand crunching under his bare feet. The wind picked up, whipping across the dunes. He saw Keturah standing near the water's edge. She held their 2-month-old son, Solomon, tucked against her chest. With her free hand, she was fighting a losing battle with a massive, floppy straw hat. A giant, ugly yellow sunflower was pinned to the side of it. Benjamin reached her and felt the sun warm his shoulders. He spent so much of his life in the dark corners of Philadelphia. His world was often defined by cold rooms and hard choices. But here, looking at his wife, the shadows didn't seem to reach. You look like you're losing a fight with that hat, Benjamin teased. Keturah squinted up at him. It's a vintage look, Benjamin. Try to have some taste. I have taste, he said. That's why I married you. She laughed, the sound carrying over the crashing waves. Benjamin looked past her to the shoreline. Zilphia and Jedediah were sprinting through the surf. The water was freezing for late October, but they didn't seem to care. They splashed each other, their screams of joy cutting through the wind. Benjamin watched Jedediah closely. The boy was nearly 13. In a little over a year, his childhood would officially end. His 14th birthday would bring the induction. He would become a made man. He would carry the weight that Benjamin carried. But right now, Jedediah just looked like a kid. He had a boyish grin on his face as he ducked a handful of water thrown by his sister. Jedediah caught his father's eye and waved. Benjamin nodded back. He felt a sharp pang of pride. He loved seeing them master the things he taught them, like how to run a pool table or how to stand their ground. He loved all three of them with a fierce, quiet intensity. Benjamin stepped closer to Keturah and wrapped an arm around her waist. He reached up and placed his hand over hers on the brim of that ridiculous hat. "Let it go," he whispered. "Benjamin, no." He pulled her hand away. A sudden gust of wind caught the straw brim. The hat flew from her head, tumbling across the sand like a golden retriever on the loose. The bright yellow sunflower flashed one last time before the wind carried it toward the dunes. Keturah gave him an indignant shove. "You did that on purpose." "That was my favorite." "It was an eyesore," Benjamin said, pulling her flush against his chest. He leaned down and kissed her. She resisted for a second, then softened, leaning into him. He felt the small, steady weight of Solomon between them. Benjamin took the baby from her arms. Solomon blinked up at him with dark blue eyes, Benjamin's eyes. "I have 3 more hats just like it in the suitcase," Keturah warned, though she was smiling now. "I figured as much," Benjamin said. He looked back toward the house. "You've turned my manicured lawn into a graveyard for toys and wildflowers. There is sand in the foyer. There is chaos in every room." "It's a good kind of chaos," she said. She reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. "Admit it. You were bored before I got here." Benjamin looked at his children, then at the baby in his arms, and finally at his wife. The dark spots of his professional life still existed. He still had to be the man people feared. But this was his safe haven. "I wasn't bored," Benjamin corrected. "I was empty. There's a difference." Barnaby, their dog, came charging out from under a lounge chair. She barked at a seagull and then dove into the chase with the older kids. The scene was a mess of flying sand, wet fur, and loud laughter. "I love our life," Benjamin said. "It's perfect." Keturah stood on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "We made it this way, Benjamin. We have to choose to be happy every single day. Especially in our world." Benjamin thought about the photo he kept in his wallet. It was a picture of this exact scene. It wasn't a professional portrait. It was raw and real. It showed the dirt, the laughter, and the light. He didn't need to travel hundreds of miles to find peace anymore. "I think I'm getting better at making that choice," Benjamin said. He watched Zilphia trip Jedediah into a shallow wave. The boy emerged soaking wet and shaking with laughter. "Are you going to help them?" Keturah asked, nodding toward the chaos. Benjamin handed Solomon back to her and began to roll up his sleeves. "I think I'm going to show them how to properly win a water fight." "Go easy on them," Keturah called out as he started toward the water. Benjamin didn't look back. "Since when do I ever go easy?"